1. I've been working in hotels for over 5 years now. I've seen my fair share of freakouts, had threats against me, people wanting to get violent, the whole phone camera in my face thing, etc. I'm a big guy, I can deal with it. As I've gotten older, I guess, I've become less accepting of it all, though. You know how you were when you first started hotel work? When a guest is going crazy over something so small like their towels not being refreshed, so you rush around and comp a bottle of wine to make it all go away? I definitely feel that we, as an industry, need to be able to back ourselves and have a spine sometimes. Because if someone starts freaking out at me in public outside of work, you can bet I just won't accept it and go shut them a drink or a meal. At the current property I work at, we have a bit of a blacklist for folks who have stolen things, had big parties, fights, harassment of staff, etc. Our property isn't too shy to blacklist someone and tell them they are for any of the above reasons. But we seem to roll over when the guest is with a big business. Now, I'm not writing this to say everyone who complains should be banned, or something wild like that. This story happened recently. I noticed a reservation coming in that's booked with us before. It's under a company name, so our standard procedure for corporate clients is no pre-authorization, just site ID and hand keys over. Sort of like the privilege you get for coming in to stay with us for work. Because we're more a corporate hotel. This particular corporate, I've never seen the name before, and the business is pretty small, but legitimate. Anyway, the reservation says the person has stayed with us before, so standard procedure. Checked ID, sent on their way. Now, the next day when I came in for my evening shift, I read in the morning report that this guest was furious at staff for an issue that was in relation to something not being prepared in the room correctly. I read the report and thought to myself, oh, just another Karen or whatever. Later I learned from the morning staff that dealt with him that he was extremely verbally aggressive. Not swearing, but demeaning and practically bullying. Next thing I knew, later in the night, the same man came back to the desk and hunched over the counter. "I'd like to know why my bed was bloody well taken out." My colleague apologized, but as she starts to talk, he keeps snapping back, wide-eyed and furious. Speaking so fast and sharp, he calls us liars and calls us stupid, etc., practically bullying us. I feel a stone well in my throat as I get fired up with the way he speaks to us, especially how he's directing it at my colleague, who is smaller in stature. All the while in front of the guests behind him. I stood up for myself. "Sir, speak to us with more respect so we can help you. You're here under your company name, is that right? You're not setting a good representation of your business. I suggest you calm down a bit, please." He backs down. He then snaps at me. "You're not setting a bloody good example, are you? Can't wait to send this all to your manager. Get up to my room and fix this right now." He storms off. I go ahead and do what's requested. I take a spare bed to the room. He opens the door. "Where would you like me to put it?" I ask. "Where it was. I don't know where that is." Another guest in the room sheepishly says, "On the floor, please." Almost as if this guy's been going off on his guest, too. The agitated guest starts holding a door open for me, staring straight into the distance, not giving me a glance, wide-eyed, with his chest puffed out, with all the bravado you'd expect from a man with such a Napoleon complex. I walk past and say, "Have a good day." He slams the door behind me. The hardest I've ever seen. He's such a fool, a simple, tiny issue fixed in a minute. And you act like an animal. Later in the night, he passes by with his family. I look over, and he has the same look. Not looking at me, just looking straight ahead, walking so quick. There's no words between us, but it's very obvious he's still super pissed. I didn't get to check him out, but I heard he just put his keys in the express checkout box. End of the day, if you're staying at a hotel and you're a representative of a company, staying on company money, you'd think you'd act with a bit more civility, right? Obviously, I antagonized the guest a bit by standing up to him. But this story does not do it any justice to the way this man stood over my work colleagues and bludgeoned them with his words on 2 occasions. How could any of us step forward and hand a bottle of complimentary wine to a man when we fear he'd smash it to the floor in anger? I will be approaching the management team and requesting an email be sent to this man's company condemning his behavior and banning him from the property. People like this need to learn a lesson. I know my management team will most likely turn around and say, "It's over now, don't stress." And I know a few of you may say the same. I'm just curious if anyone else here has been through a similar experience, where a corporate client acted far too aggressively for the given situation, and correspondence was sent to the guest company notifying them of such behavior. I know the whole meme of, well, that's hospitality for you, haha, but no. We're not verbal punching bags, and we should have just as much right to complain about a corporate client's behavior as anyone else will submit scathing complaints about us. 2. This story took place 6 months ago, so tonight has been one of the worst nights for me this year so far. Considering the year is almost over, I think I came out okay. I walk into work, and Dum Dum is there. I know it's mean to call someone Dum Dum, but seriously, it's either that or moron, and that's an insult to morons. Being one myself sometimes. So I ask her how this night went, which is akin to shouting into an empty bucket. "Hello?" She stumbles out of her stupor. Okay, maybe she was doing quantum physics in her head, and she really is an idiot savant. Now, if we can just find her brilliant talent. She looks at me and says, "Oh yeah, that team we have in-house. You know, that team. Well, a room said they were yelling in the hallway." Okay, did you call the coach and have her check it out? Did you go up there? Yeah, they're quiet now." Okay, what room complained? "I don't remember." You know, I'm surprised she actually was able to form as many sentences as she just did, so I let it go. Fast forward a few hours. I'm jamming out to our piped-in lobby music that I actually like, because I'm old as hell and the music reminds me of before I was doomed to be a civil servant in hell, because in some other life I stepped on an ant and I'm grabbing garbages, making enough noise that I didn't hear her at first. Not until she started yelling. Not shouting or screaming. Yelling! Now, I don't normally startle, but when I do, I'm 3 verses into Gold Dust Woman while dancing around with a garbage cart. Thank God I didn't shart. So I turn around to see where this onslaught is coming from, and it's this tiny woman. Well, tiny to me, because I'm a fucking 6-foot-tall Amazon. Rawr. Not using our indoor voices, "I paid $135 for this room, and there's a party upstairs, and I told the girl before, and they're still having a grand old time, and you better come my room." Okay, so getting yelled at, as it is always tough, and you know I should be alarmed, but I can't. This lady has a band-aid right smack dab in the middle of her forehead, like one you would use on your finger, right there in the middle of her forehead. Now, I don't know what's under there, a wart, a scab, a zit, a gaping hole of suck, I don't know. But if it were me, I think I would just roll with whatever wound I had versus wearing a band-aid. Because there's something about a crusty old band-aid in the middle of your forehead that just screams, "I didn't take my lithium today." Okay, ma'am, I'm so sorry. I will run up there right now and make sure this party clears out. And I did. Nothing. Not a sound. I even stood around for a while. Nada, zip. In fact, it is so quiet I think maybe God finally had mercy on my soul and decided to release me from this purgatory. So I go back to what I was doing in a much less chipper mood, because fuck my happiness. It's like the angels say, "Oh hey, look, she's actually feeling good today. Cool, the psycho." A few hours go by, and I think, great, Crazy took her meds, all is well. The peasants rejoice. Yay! So I'm doing some paperwork, thinking, yeah, bring on the weekend. I wonder if... Oh my fucking god, what the fuck? Standing there with this blank stare like she is sleepwalking or some shit is Band-Aid Woman. She just raises her one arm and points. So I look behind me to see what she's pointing to. It's me. She's pointing at me. I'm like, nice try, lady, but the devil already took my soul. Obviously, I work here. Your voodoo shit won't work on me. In a much calmer voice. Now there are noises above me, loud ones, and my cat is scared. The fuck, what cat? We don't even allow cats. Your cat? Yes, my Maine Coon Freddy keeps looking up at the ceiling at the noises. He's visibly shaking. He's so scared. I don't think we can sleep here tonight. We're going to sleep in the van. At this point, I'm throwing cash at her just to get her out the door. Yeah, sure, no charge, see ya. Please don't kill me. So now I keep seeing her out of the corner of my eye, and I go to look, and nothing is there. In fact, I'm not even 100% sure there even was anyone in that room. The haunting of the crazy Band-Aid lady. 3. I have worked for a brand for nearly a decade now. I started in a franchise, but was unhappy, and moved to a corporately owned hotel that was much happier. I was there for just about 6 years. For the first 5 years, I worked under one of the best GMs, no, human beings, I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. It was wonderful. Right around the 5.5-year mark, she took another GM position at a different hotel. No one knew what was going on with the GM position, but being the senior employee, I essentially ran the hotel for 4 months before the new GM, an outside hire, was brought in. We found out that the new GM was friends with one of the VPs of corporate, and that is probably why she was given the position. So, first thing to note is that I do not say any of this with malice. I don't judge people, but the new GM was... I don't know how to say this gracefully. Large. She was not physically capable of doing anything the job required. Her desk was a mere 5 feet away from the front desk. But she could not regularly get up to help guests, despite her being responsible for the desk for 6 hours a day. This led to her having an additional employee from our already understaffed employees on duty with her at all times. This led to a ton of overtime for everyone, etc. She was responsible for things like checking rooms before they are put into the system as clean, but she couldn't do that. She would instead just put them in as clean without checking, even if they weren't. So second and third shifts would regularly check guests into filthy rooms, which she would blame on the front desk agent who checked them in, leading to numerous write-ups and people leaving. The employee she had at her hip to do her work for her was a bit of a snake. She would regularly badmouth everyone else to the GM, and in the course of a few months, all of our housekeeping staff had left or been fired. Most of them had worked there for years without issue. We're talking like 2 or 3 write-ups in the entire time I had been there for all employees. And this new GM wrote 20 plus in the first 2 months. It was bad. That snake employee, turns out she was on meth like 90% of the time, and would steal from the cash drawer regularly. She wasn't fired, she ended up quitting because everyone found out about her. New GM would also regularly and intentionally wait until after the corporate HR office closed to issue write-ups to employees, so that her actions would not be scrutinized in real time. Anyway, 2 months in, there are 3 of us employees left, all front desk. One of them left shortly after because a guest was actively following around said employee, verbally harassing and sexually harassing her. It was non-stop. When I sat down to talk to the GM about it to help the female employee, the GM is also female by the way, the GM said, and I quote, "Well, she has curves, so she should expect it." I told the employee her response, and that was the last of that. We then get temp hires from an agency that doesn't specialize in housekeeping to come clean rooms. It's a huge clusterfuck. We were paying like $25 an hour for housekeepers that had no idea what they were doing, and we couldn't hire anyone because the GM couldn't be bothered. Finally, onto my part of the story. Like I had mentioned, I had been working there 6 years. I have never been written up. I had been regularly praised by corporate, even to the point where the CEO of the company called me to speak to me about an incident where I saved a guest's life. I'm quite good at my job, and I actually care about the guests and my fellow employees. The last remaining front desk agent and I were talking one day, and she mentioned how she thinks the 2 females on the 4th floor are prostituting. As I usually do, I looked into it. Cameras show 10 to 15 guys coming in the side door with her, short visits every night. I then tried to tie her phone number, pictures, anything to ads presented online. I could not get concrete evidence, which is generally required to remove at this company. Instead, the only other option is to speak with them regarding the traffic, and limit or flat out prevent them from entertaining visitors. So I spoke with them at the front desk, and they were friendly and understood. Generally, this is enough for them to check out the next day and move on to the next hotel. Not these 2 women. Remember, what I was doing was standard for us. I did this and removed over 100 prostitutes in that time. They came to the front desk and made a complaint about me. They said I was sexually harassing them, and that I wanted in on whatever they had going on up there or I would kick them out. They even went as far as to create a fake Snapchat account and screenshot fake conversations between us. I was given a final written warning after HR closed. No talking to me about what was going on, no evidence, nothing. I indicated I would appeal to the GM, which is the protocol. A week later, the 2 women were caught by the GM and another employee prostituting. They knew what was suspected was true. They knew everything they said was bullshit. When I mentioned this and the status of my write-up, it was mentioned to me that what's done is done. Best part above all this, I'm gay. Everyone already knew or suspected I was, but I never directly told anyone. Turns out, new GM hates gay people. So when she found out, she made it her mission to get rid of me. I was also the only man there, so she already wasn't comfortable with me. She would pretend to be fine with me, but I caught her once saying the F word when describing gay people. Other co-workers told me she has called me a fairy and a fruit. Other co-workers put in complaints about her speaking about me in that manner, using our anonymous complaint line. This had been going on for some time. I sent an email to the regional manager when I found out, detailing everything going on: theft, drug use, prostitutes, her putting her work on others, etc. I specifically asked the regional manager not to tell the GM. I specifically mentioned that I was afraid of retaliation. Company policy says that said complaints should be private. Well, the regional manager called her and told her everything. A few days later, I came into work at 4 p.m., and she sat at her desk for 2 hours until 6 p.m. in order to write me up and terminate me, after HR closed, hence awaiting, for something completely meaningless, using the final written warning as the reason why it had to be termination. During said meeting, she even specifically stated that, "You know what this is about. I know what this is about." It was clearly retaliatory. I called HR the next morning. They said they investigated the claims of the prostitutes and proved them valid. Thing is, they didn't. The cameras had not been hooked up to the internet for 8 months. They put in a new system and screwed it up. If they did, they would have seen that the only time I spoke with these prostitutes was at the front desk in full view of the cameras. They had the GM investigate on site, the one that doesn't do anything, and took her word for it. They also never got my appeal request. They stated that it's normal for them to share complaints with the person being complained about. They also initiated a new policy that cut my last paycheck substantially, saying that I had read and signed it a month prior, despite me not having done that to my knowledge. There's almost certainly a lawsuit there, probably a dozen things I forgot to mention, as it's been like 6 months since it happened. But I was offered a job like 2 days later, same brand actually, just a franchise, and I'm doing quite well. I am treated with the utmost respect by both the owner and the GM, and they know they can rely on me. Though every once in a while I wonder if the corporate goons ever figured out what she really is. I'm sure that day is coming. 4. This happened last summer when I had a student job in some kind of fancy hotel in my town. First I started working in a laundry room, and after a week or so, when my employers figured that they could utilize me better since I speak 3 languages, I got promoted to work at the front desk during weekdays. However, I still had laundry room duty on the weekends. This laundry room job included taking care of the jacuzzi reservations in the afternoons. The hotel had a jacuzzi on the roof, and my job was to clean it and fill with clean water before the first guests arrive. And later, in between appointments, I just had to scrub the edges of the pool and change the towels. Dirty practice, yes, I agree, but as you might know, there really is no time to really clean everything. These appointments would give guests 45 minutes of pool time, and then I had 15 minutes to do my thing before the other guests arrive. So one day I was notified that I will have 3 appointments to take care of. No problem. Just as I was done with cleaning and started going down the stairs, I ran into the guests. They were Italian, a cute couple, maybe in their 30s. They politely asked me if they could stay for a bit longer than the given 45 minutes. I had to tell them no, because we had other guests right after them. All right then, no problem. We will be out on time. I went to do some other stuff until it was time to go and clean up after them. I scrubbed everything and went to turn the jets on, and then I noticed a condom floating around in the water. I was so annoyed. I knew I only had a few minutes until the next guests come up, and I had absolutely nothing to use to fish the damn thing out. I tried grabbing it with my hand. Luckily, I was still wearing those cleaning gloves, but to no avail. Also worth noting is that I am a fairly small woman. This damn jacuzzi was huge, and 2 of its sides were against the glass walls, so I could not even go around to get closer to the stupid condom. With no other available options and having to act quick, I jumped on the corner of the pool. I slowly tried reaching with one hand while holding at the edge of the pool with the other. But just as I was about to catch this idiotic little floater, I lost my grip and fell inside. I cursed my life and luck and fucking Italians. I grabbed the condom and went away angrily. Also, I have to mention that in order to go from the roof to the laundry room, I had to go through the majority of the hotel's hallways soaking wet. Luckily, I did not run into anyone there. The colleague who was at the front desk at the time, of course, laughed his ass off when he saw me. I told him what happened, and then he laughed even harder. He got me some dry clothes after that, though, so I didn't mind. 5. So this happened years ago. I used to work fully seasonally and would do night audit through the winters. It was my first winter in a new town, and I was coming from dealing exclusively with the extremely wealthy. As I'm sure most people reading this can attest to, the rich are absolutely awful humans as a rule. So I thought that it would be more rewarding to deal with a different societal group. And I was right, but I may have swung that pendulum too far. My town had a disproportionately large homeless population for many reasons, and only a single homeless shelter that had beds for under a quarter of the population, and didn't allow anyone inside if they were intoxicated. I chose to work at a hotel that took up the city block between the homeless shelter and the hospital, and we were all right on the river. In the winter, exposure for the homeless was a huge danger, and the humid river air made hypothermia and frostbite come on unusually quick for the area. Every night, probably an average of 100 people under the influence of alcohol, heroin, and meth that were likely out in the cold after getting turned away from the homeless shelter would have to figure out how not to die. Many of them went to the ER, and to get to the ER, they had to walk right by my lobby. So I'm sure you can guess what the night shift was like on sub-zero degree nights. So there I was, either reading a dumb sci-fi book or writing a dumb sci-fi book, when I heard a smack against the front door, which I kept locked and opened for each guest individually. I looked up, and there was an unresponsive woman lying on the ground, her head and the back of her t-shirt covered in blood. It was a very cold night, and she was wearing just yoga pants and a torn shirt. My summer work requires that I'm always up on my first responder training, so I've dealt with similar. I was actively certified and thus obligated to provide care to the extent of my training. I dialed 911 in my cell as I was opening the door, and I just left it on speaker as I started assessing her. She was faking her unresponsiveness, but was clearly disoriented and had severely reduced cognitive ability, but responsive. I got her inside and locked the door behind me out of habit. Many times every night, the homeless would test the door as they walked by, and could be dangerous if they got entry. But my locking the door triggered an aggressive response in this gal, who thought I was trying to kidnap her. I immediately unlocked it and started on de-escalating the situation. But the 911 gal was antagonizing her by trying to take control of the situation remotely. After some back and forth, 911 lady started getting upset that she didn't have my full attention, and I was getting overwhelmed trying to de-escalate both the injured lady and the 911 lady. So I politely asked the 911 lady to shut the fuck up, repeated my address, repeated the request for an ambulance, and when she didn't break her script, I spoke over her to tell her she was being antagonistic, and that I was going to mute her so that she would be able to monitor the situation without interrupting it. The last words that came over the speakerphone from her as I was turning down the speaker volume were something about sending police. The police talk totally re-escalated the injured gal, and she ran into the kitchen, looking for somewhere to hide, while leaving blood just everywhere. I followed her back where she had put herself in a storage area with no egress. When I found her, I am sure that she felt trapped and confused, but regardless, she attacked me aggressively. I backed away and did not engage physically, but she got a few deep and quite bloody scratches into my arm. She ran out the front door, so I went and locked it behind her before starting on my first aid and cleanup. There was just blood everywhere at this point. Her blood on the door, and a trail on the floor to the chair where I sat her, in a pool under the chair, handprints everywhere, soaked into a box of toilet paper in the storage area, etc. And I had bled on the front of my pants somewhat extensively where I was treating my scratches, and she had torn my shirt. As I was scrubbing bloody spots away, she then returned, tried the door, and then slumped down when she found it locked. I opened the door again, and she said something along the lines of freezing to death, and being confused and not being able to stand anymore. I brought her in again, but more wary this time. I started treating her and was able to develop enough trust for her to start telling me her story. It was as confused as she was, but some common themes were her being kidnapped, raped, sold into sexual slavery, being forced to take drugs until a dependence developed, and finally being kidnapped, jailed, abused, and raped by police was a disjointed but present theme. This is not an uncommon story around where I live. Human trafficking is rampant on reservations, and we have a couple nearby in addition to it being a major travel corridor. She claimed that the last thing she remembered clearly was getting her head slammed into the sidewalk, repeatedly, by her pimp. She had then been taken to the hospital by a stranger, but she had escaped when they refused to treat her before she was examined by the police. I'm not sure her level of comprehension or accuracy of her story. This part seems suspect to me. But anyways, this is what brought her to me. The police finally showed up. Must have been 45 minutes since I had called 911 at this point. Half-mile from the police station. No ambulance, no one with an active EMT cert, just two grumpy policemen on the overnight shift. She started to panic, and I told her I would be a go-between with them, and that I would lock the door and not let them set foot inside, and I showed her an escape route where she could get away if they came in anyways. This calmed her significantly. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me, keeping one eye on her through the glass. Locking the door upset the police, and they started demanding that I unlock it. I refused and repeatedly tried to explain why, but they got gradually more aggressive. Eventually, they were threatening to arrest me for obstruction, her for trespassing, threatening to bust down the door, and one had his hand on his gun while the other had a hand on his taser. I was reminding them that they were on video, which was cloud-stored, and that did seem to make an impact, and they started to act a little less aggressively. We started to get a little back and forth, during which time I asked them if they knew when the ambulance would arrive. They said there were no available ambulances, so I asked when they thought one might be available. They said that there would never be an ambulance available for an incident like this. I chose not to antagonize them further on that subject. They started talking derogatorily towards the homeless population, and our location, and so on. Eventually, I had convinced them that I could deal with it and they could leave, and they did. I went back in, and she was very grateful. At this point, I had a pressure wrap on her head wound, and I had given her tea and a muffin after asking after allergies many times, and she was growing more in her cognitive ability. I asked if she would be willing to return to the hospital if they were able to provide treatment without police, and she was open. I called the hospital, but my memory is fuzzy on that conversation. They wanted something that I couldn't provide. I think it was her ID or something. And they wanted me to accompany her, which would have gotten me fired. But anyway, that attempt was a bust. I went back to chat with her about where things sat, and she brought up that her parents probably had the same landline as when she was a kid, and she remembered that number. Their reservation town was a couple hours' drive away from where we were. She put in the number, but was too nervous to actually talk to them. At this point, it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. But I called. Someone answered sleepily. I confirmed their identity and told them I was with their daughter. They were immediately 100% elated and on their way down to pick her up. I asked the injured lady if I could put them on speaker, and she assented. Her and her mom talked for the entire time that her parents were driving, apart from where they went through areas without service. I got her set up on our easy-to-clean couch and tried to give her some privacy, as it was apparently that her kidnapping story had plenty of truth, and I wanted her to have the space to speak openly with her parents. I started cleaning and was about finished when the parents showed up, near 4:30 or 5 a.m. They were all crying and happy, and the mom kept trying to push money on me that I was refusing, and the dad kept stopping to hug me and told me over and over that I had saved her life. I started crying, which was rather embarrassing for me, and I felt myself start racing towards a panic attack. I have some trauma-related stuff around showing emotion that I hadn't yet started to work on back then. So I shooed them out, telling them that I wanted them to get home before the roads started to get slippy in the sun. I had my panic attack in the bathroom. Had breakfast ready on time at 5:30 a.m. Found around $300 that the mom had left near the computer while my back was turned, and spent most of the rest of the shift writing up an incident report. I had to stay an extra couple hours because my boss wanted an in-person report and didn't want to come in before 8 a.m. She showed up, I gave the report, she confirmed on the recording, she chewed me out pretty well, wrote me up, charged me the cost of a breakfast ticket for the muffin and tea I gave her, and threatened to fire me if I shirked my duties again. A lot of people have said very kind things. Thank you for that. Honestly, though, it makes me pretty uncomfortable. A lot of that feeling is coming from my personal mental health challenges, but I think a big piece of it is also coming from my not thinking of this as a happy story. I think that after our night, that gal might have had a chance, and that is worth celebrating for a time. But it wasn't a good chance. She was coming from what was likely long-term abuse and substance dependence. Her family could be in danger from her returning to them. I hope they're in witness protection or something, and that she has the best psychologist in the country on speed dial. But I don't want to know the truth, because if I don't know, then I can at least imagine that she is still alive. The things that are happening to women on our reservations make hope tough, though, sometimes. It's not so much that they're visibly murdered or anything. It's that they just disappear. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Coahw, episode 87. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do share it around with everyone you know. It is very much appreciated. Okay, we're on Tuesday today, aren't we? Yes, I believe we are. Yep. Pretending I don't know. Let's see. No things planned. As I'm doing this, as I'm recording this, was making this video, I did a little experimental stream. Not of me recording. I have done those before. Hopefully I'll do those again. But I was streaming a playlist of stories that I'd removed from YouTube because they were fairy tales. And I wasn't sure that YouTube would recognize that these were definitely not meant for children. These are the slightly more gruesome original versions, which not for kids. So I decided to try doing a playlist stream, because they've got channels out there that do 24-hour streams, and I'm curious to try that. So I was kind of feeling things out with that. You heard me talking about it in a previous video, perhaps. So kind of testing the water, see how it goes. The functionality of it is very easy. Just do it through OBS. You need to have VLC installed as well. But I have those things, and I had the videos on my computer, and just popped them in a playlist, and it was fine. So that seems to be going well. Now, before we go, let's have Hellfreezer's question of the day. Favorite rice dish? I'm only saying that because I'm hungry and I'm thinking about rice. So what do you like to do with it? Rice is a very versatile thing, many different varieties. Lately I've really been enjoying the kind of long basmati rice. Good stuff. But I'm not above some plain old long grain as well. So what do you like to do with it? I like to make a big plate of curry and mix everything together. Or if not, sometimes I'll just start cooking with whatever ingredients I've got, herbs and spices, and plop the rice in, and just let everything cook away. And I guess a little bit of a risotto in many ways, or a stir fry maybe. But well, there are many ways. Let me know what you think in a comment below. Okay, and with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.